Mom doesn't need to know. That is what my son said. Not to me. To his wife. In my own kitchen. While I was standing on the other side of that door. I heard every single word. And I said nothing. Not because I had nothing to say. But because a woman who has lived 67 years on this earth knows something a 38-year-old man does not. Silence is not weakness. Silence is a plan. If you have ever stood in a room and heard the truth about how someone really sees you, stay with me. Because what I did with what I heard that afternoon took 11 weeks. Cost me nothing. And it changed everything. My name is Margaret. I am 67 years old. I spent 33 years as a librarian at the Clarksville Public Library in Central Tennessee. I know every kind of story there is. The ones with happy endings. The ones that don't end at all. And the ones where the person holding the book finally realizes they have been reading it upside down. This is that kind of story. My husband, Leonard, died 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the morning I sat beside his bed and held his hand and watched him go. He had been building me a new bookshelf that week. It is still unfinished in the garage. I cannot bring myself to move it. Some things you leave exactly where they were. Leonard and I had lived in our house on Birchwood Lane for 29 years. Cream siding, green shutters. A kitchen window that faced east and caught the morning light in a way that made even bad coffee feel like a kindness. My grandson Noah is 6 years old. He has Leonard's eyes. Deep brown, patient, the kind of eyes that notice everything and say nothing about it. Just like his grandmother. My son Daniel was not always this man. I need you to understand that before I tell you what I heard. He was the boy who, at 16, woke up at 5 in the morning on my birthday to make me pancakes before school. He burned 3 batches. He served me the 4th one with a candle stuck in the middle, looking so proud of himself I could have cried. That boy still lives somewhere inside the man who stood in my kitchen that afternoon. He just got very lost along the way. I noticed the change the year he married Sasha. Not because of Sasha, I want to be careful about that. But because Daniel had always been the kind of man who needed to be needed. And Sasha needed him to choose. Every time. Completely. So he did. And slowly, without either of them meaning for it to happen, I became something Daniel managed rather than someone he loved. The first time I noticed the money disappearing, it was a Tuesday morning in March. I had logged into my bank account to pay my quarterly insurance premium. The balance was $2,200 lower than it should have been. I sat very still. I checked the transaction history. 3 transfers. Over 6 weeks. To an account I did not recognize. My hand was resting on the kitchen table. I did not move it. I just looked at the screen for a long time while the refrigerator hummed and the morning light came through the east window and landed on the floor exactly the way it always did. $2,200. Then I remembered. 8 months earlier Daniel had asked if he could have access to my online banking. Just to help me manage bills, he said. You get confused with all the login passwords, Mom. It would give me peace of mind. I had said yes. Of course I had said yes. I was still saying yes the way I had been saying yes for 38 years. But I had been too trusting. Too willing to believe that the boy who burned 3 batches of pancakes for me would never take something I hadn't offered. What I didn't know yet, what I had no way of knowing sitting at that kitchen table, was that $2,200 was not the beginning of the story. It was the middle. I did not say anything to Daniel. Not that day. Not that week. Instead, I called my neighbor Frances on a Thursday afternoon. Frances Beaumont had lived next door to me for 21 years. She was 71 years old, sharp as a sewing needle, and had the particular gift of listening without filling the silence with her own opinions. I told her what I had found. She listened. Then she said very quietly, "Dorothy, I think you should know something. And I have been trying to decide for 2 weeks whether to tell you." She told me carefully. Daniel had been in the driveway talking to her husband, Gene, the previous month. Casual conversation. Except at one point Daniel had said, and Gene had mentioned it to Frances that same evening, that his mother was starting to struggle a bit. Getting forgetful. Probably going to need help managing her affairs before too long. I looked at Frances. Getting forgetful. I, who had catalogued 40,000 books. I, who could tell you the Dewey Decimal Number for any subject you named. I, who had not forgotten a single thing in 67 years, including the faces of the people who had underestimated me. Thanked Francis. I walked back inside. I stood in the hallway and looked at the unfinished bookshelf through the garage door window. I went to my desk drawer and found the card that Helen Marsh had given me at a neighborhood association meeting 14 months earlier. Estate planning and family law. I had kept it for no reason I could name at the time. Now I knew exactly why. I called her that afternoon. But I still said nothing to Daniel. Not yet. Helen Marsh was 63 years old and had the kind of stillness that comes from spending decades making sure the right people kept what was theirs. She listened to everything. Then she said, "How can I help?" We met 3 times over the following 4 weeks. I also spoke with my accountant, Roy Simmons, who had been doing my taxes since 1994, and who pulled up my complete transaction history with the quiet efficiency of a man who had seen this before and found it neither surprising nor acceptable. The total was $6,800. Over 14 months. I looked at that number in Roy's office, in the light of a Wednesday afternoon, and I thought about 33 years of library work. I thought about Leonard, who had clipped coupons every Sunday so we could save an extra $40 a month. I thought about $6,800 and what it actually meant. Not as a number, but as the accumulated evidence of what my son believed about me. That I was a resource. That I was already fading. That I didn't need to know. Helen made 4 changes on my behalf. I will not tell you all 4. I will tell you that Daniel was no longer listed where he had been listed. And I will tell you that my niece Clara in Nashville, who called every Sunday evening without fail and asked about Leonard's photographs on the wall, now held a role that Daniel had assumed would always be his. I stopped the bank access that same week. Daniel found out on a Friday morning. I was deadheading the roses along the front porch, something Leonard had taught me, the way you cut the dead blooms so the living ones have room, when my phone rang. It rang 6 times. On the 7th, I pulled off my gardening gloves, set them on the porch rail and picked up. Now, before I tell you what happened on that phone call, I have to tell you about the afternoon 3 weeks earlier. The afternoon I heard everything. I had been in the kitchen making sweet tea. Daniel and Sasha had come for Sunday lunch. The children were in the backyard. I had stepped into the hallway to call them in for food when I heard Daniel's voice from the living room. He was on the phone. Or so I thought. Then I heard Sasha answer. And I stopped. "Did you move the money from her account this month?" Sasha asked. Not yet, Daniel said. "I'll do it Tuesday. What if she notices?" And then came the words. "Mom doesn't need to know." I stood in that hallway. I did not drop the glass I was holding. I did not make a sound. I walked back into the kitchen, finished pouring the sweet tea, and called the children in from the backyard with the same voice I had used every Sunday for 6 years. I set the food on the table. I sat across from my son. I looked at him. And I smiled. 'Cause I already knew. And he had no idea that I knew. And in that moment I understood something Leonard had told me once, on the porch, watching the fireflies come up from the yard on a July evening. He said, "Margaret, the most powerful thing a person can have is information the other person thinks they buried." I had it now. And I was going to use it the right way. The phone rang 6 times that Friday morning. On the 7th I picked up. Daniel's voice was completely different. The easy confidence, the voice of a man who had moved through the world assuming the doors would open, was gone. What was left was younger, stripped down, almost unrecognizable. "Mom," he said. "Daniel," I said. "My name was removed from. There's a letter from Helen Marsh and I don't." He stopped. Started again. "Mom, what did you do?" I let the question sit in the air between us for a moment. "What I should have done," I said, 14 months ago. Silence. "Why didn't you just talk to me?" I thought about the hallway. The sweet tea. The glass I did not drop. "Because you told Sasha I didn't need to know," I said. "So I decided you didn't need to know either. Not until I was ready." The silence that followed was the longest one. When he spoke again, His voice had something in it I had not heard since he was a boy who had burned 3 batches of pancakes and didn't know how to say sorry. Mom, I don't. He stopped. I don't know when I stopped thinking of you as a person, I said quietly. He didn't answer. I know, I said. That's why I waited. I needed you to feel what it was like to not be told something important. To find out after the fact. To realize that someone you trusted had been quietly doing things you had no idea about. Another long silence. That's exactly what I did to you, he said. Yes, I said. It is. I did not see Daniel for 7 weeks after that call. What I heard through Francis was that he and Sasha had stopped using the word inheritance in conversation. That the newer car had been sold. That the weekend trips had stopped. I don't take pleasure in that. I want to be clear. Consequences are not revenge. They are just the shape that truth makes when it lands. 7 weeks later, Daniel came to the house on a Saturday morning. Alone. No Sasha. He knocked. He had a key. He had always had a key. But he knocked. Opened the door. He was holding a folder. Inside was a printed bank statement showing a transfer of $6,800, the exact total Roy had calculated, into my account. He had taken out a personal loan. He looked at me the way people look at you when they have been carrying something heavy for a long time and are finally setting it down. I know it doesn't fix it, he said. No, I said. But it's a beginning. I let him in. We sat at the kitchen table. The same table where I had poured sweet tea 3 months earlier, and looked at my son across the food I had made and smiled because I already knew. He asked about Noah. I asked about his work. We talked the way people talk when they are rebuilding something carefully. Slowly, with attention, checking each board before they put their weight on it. Before he left, he stood in the hallway and looked at the unfinished bookshelf through the garage door window. I could finish that, he said quietly. If you'd let me. I looked at the bookshelf. At the wood Leonard had cut and sanded and left exactly as it was. Not yet, I said. But maybe. He nodded. He understood what that meant. I am sitting on the front porch as I finish telling you this. It is an October evening in Tennessee. The fireflies are coming up from the yard the way they do every year, slow and certain, like small lights that know exactly where they belong. Leonard's rocking chair is beside mine. My phone buzzed a few minutes ago. A text from Clara in Nashville. Thinking of you tonight, Aunt Margaret. You doing okay? Type back, more than okay. Come see me soon. She sent a heart. I put the phone in my lap and looked out at Birchwood Lane. I thought about the hallway. The glass of sweet tea. The words I was never supposed to hear. Mom doesn't need to know. But I did know. I knew everything. And the knowing, held quietly, used carefully, released at exactly the right moment, turned out to be the only thing I needed. Leonard was right. The most powerful thing a person can have is information the other person thinks they buried. Had it. I used it. And I did it all without raising my voice once. Have you ever known something you weren't supposed to know, and had to decide what to do with it? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. Share this with someone who has been underestimated by the people closest to them. Someone who needs to hear that silence can be the smartest thing in the room. And if you are not subscribed to Grandma's Moments yet, do it now. The next story begins with a grandmother who receives a phone call she was never meant to receive. What she hears on that call will change everything. You will not see it coming.